It was supposed to be an unforgettable family vacation. My parents and I had checked into a beautiful hotel, the kind where everything felt a little more magical, and the excitement of being somewhere new heightened every sense. We'd settled into our room, made a few plans for the week, and decided to start the evening with dinner at the hotel restaurant. The atmosphere was warm and lively, the low hum of conversation and clinking glasses filling the space with a pleasant buzz. As we were eating, my gaze wandered across the room, and that's when I noticed him. An older man, sitting alone, his eyes fixed directly on me. I shifted uncomfortably, wondering if it was just my imagination, but each time I looked up, his gaze was still there, unblinking and intent. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself he was probably just lost in thought or absent-mindedly staring in my direction. Still, something about his stare left a cold, uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. I didn't mention it to my parents, not wanting to cause a fuss over what I assumed was nothing. As we finished dinner, I felt a lingering sense of relief to be leaving the restaurant, thinking I'd likely never see him again. But that brief encounter stayed with me, a strange detail I couldn't entirely shake. Later that evening, I decided to meet up with a friend from school who happened to be staying in the same hotel. We made plans to go to the hotel bar for a few non-alcoholic drinks, enjoying the thrill of being out late in a grown-up setting. The bar was dimly lit, the soft glow of chandeliers casting a warm glow over clusters of people laughing and talking. It felt exciting to be out on my own, free to enjoy the atmosphere. But then, as my eyes scanned the room, I froze. Across the bar, sitting alone, was the same man from dinner. His eyes locked onto mine the moment I spotted him, his stare even more intense, as if he'd been waiting for me to look his way. I tried to ignore him, focusing on my friend and our conversation, but his presence hung over me, a constant weight that made it impossible to relax. Eventually, my friend decided to head back to her room, leaving me alone. I felt a twinge of anxiety but told myself it was fine. I'd just head straight to my room. But as I got up and made my way to the elevators, I sensed movement behind me. A quick glance confirmed my worst fear. The man had followed me and was now just a few steps behind, his face expressionless, his pace steady and intentional. When we got into the elevator, he didn't press any buttons. He simply stood there, his gaze fixed ahead, as though waiting to see which floor I'd select. My hand trembled as I pressed my floor number, my pulse racing as I tried to keep calm. As the doors opened on my floor, I quickly stepped out, heart pounding as I sensed him watching my every move. I walked down the hallway, his presence lingering like a dark shadow, and as I slipped into my room, I caught one last glimpse of him, standing in the hallway, staring after me with a look that sent chills down my spine. The moment I shut the door, I locked it, my heart pounding as I secured the chain latch and deadbolt. My hands shook as I leaned against the door, straining to hear any sound outside. It was quiet, eerily so, and I tried to convince myself that maybe he'd just wandered off. But the image of his face, his eyes fixated on me as I entered the room, lingered in my mind, making it impossible to shake the fear that he was still out there. I peered through the peephole, my breath catching as I saw him just down the hall, his body half hidden in the shadows, his eyes fixed in my direction. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, watching as though waiting for something. Minutes passed, each one stretching into what felt like an eternity. Finally, he turned and walked slowly back toward the elevator, disappearing from view. I exhaled, relief flooding through me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I spent the rest of the night trying to calm myself, though every little noise sent a shiver down my spine. Sometime after midnight, I finally drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. But around 3 a.m., a loud, jarring knock on the door jolted me awake. I sat up, heart racing as the sound echoed through the room. The knock came again, louder this time. Swallowing my fear, I crept to the door and peered through the peephole, praying I was wrong. It was him. Standing just outside, his face inches from the door, a sinister smile twisting his lips. He leaned in close, his voice low and raspy as he spoke. "Hotel staff," he growled, his tone filled with something dark and menacing. I froze, paralyzed by a mix of fear and disbelief, his hand pressing against the door as if testing its strength. Shaking, I grabbed my phone and dialed my father's number, my voice barely a whisper as I told him what was happening. Within moments, my dad was at the door, his presence a sudden surge of safety. He confronted the man, who reacted with a disturbing smile, his hands moving obscenely as he muttered something incoherent. Before he could react further, my father restrained him, his anger controlled but evident, while my mother called hotel security. Hotel security arrived swiftly, escorting the man away as the police were called. I watched in stunned silence, still processing the events as the officers questioned my parents and me, documenting every unsettling detail. My body felt numb, each moment a blur, but the relief of seeing him taken away was palpable. By morning, we learned he'd been arrested, and my parents pressed charges, determined to ensure he faced justice. From that day until now, I always pay close attention to my surroundings, and I recommend that everyone does the same. The ski trip had been the highlight of our winter, a rare chance for all of us to unwind together in a snow-covered paradise. Our parents had booked a room at a beautiful mountain resort, and we spent our days gliding down slopes and our evenings lounging around the resort's amenities. That day, my siblings and I had just finished skiing and decided to relax in the sauna, our tired limbs grateful for the warmth after hours in the cold. Inside the sauna, laughter and jokes filled the space, creating a comfortable, carefree atmosphere. My sister, just 6 years old, was the youngest among us. She was wearing a bright pink swimsuit, practically bouncing with the excitement only a child could bring to a relaxing room like a sauna. As we settled in, my sister suddenly remembered something she'd left back in our hotel room. Without thinking twice, my other siblings and I encouraged her to go get it, teasing that it would give her an excuse to practice remembering her things next time. We watched her skip out of the sauna, none of us sensing any danger. Minutes passed in comfortable silence as the warmth of the sauna wrapped around us. Through the glass door, we could see the empty hallway, the calm adding to the feeling of complete safety. But then, something made me glance up, and what I saw sent a chill through me. My little sister was running back down the hallway, her face flushed and wide-eyed, still in her pink swimsuit. Right behind her, only steps away, was a man, much older, his gaze locked onto her. He wore a collared shirt and slacks, an odd choice for someone in a resort hallway, and his expression was tense, a frown set below his white mustache. My siblings and I froze, unable to fully comprehend what was happening. The man's steps were slow, deliberate, his gaze fixed intently on my sister as she hurried toward us. In that instant, the carefree peace of our trip shattered, replaced by a terror I had never felt before. The sight of him so close, his expression so unnervingly focused, made me realize we had been too casual, too trusting. As my sister neared the sauna, my body snapped into action. I pulled open the glass door, and without a second thought, I reached out, grabbing her arm and pulling her inside. She was breathing heavily, her eyes wide with fear, clinging to me as if she could feel my own panic. My gaze shot back to the man, who had stopped just a few steps away from the sauna door, his expression shifting as he realized we were all staring at him. There was an eerie silence as he lingered outside, his face quickly transforming from focused determination to a poor attempt at innocence. "Oh, I was just looking for the gym," he mumbled, his voice shaky as he struggled to meet our eyes. He tried to act casual, but the odd combination of his dress shirt and slacks, his intense stare, and the way he froze when I'd pulled my sister inside made his excuse painfully unconvincing. For a moment, he seemed unsure of what to do next, his hands twitching as if he were debating his next move. Then, sensing he'd been caught, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the hall without another word. Inside the sauna, the silence lingered as we tried to process what had just happened. My sister held on to me, her small hands clutching my arm tightly. Finally, she began to tell us what happened, her voice soft and frightened. She explained how, moments after leaving the room, she'd noticed the man following her. She had felt uncomfortable, her instinct telling her something wasn't right, and terrified, she'd bolted back to the sauna to find us. When we returned to our hotel room, my mother's face went pale as I told her what had happened. Her worry quickly turned to anger and fear, and she scolded me for letting my sister go alone, her frustration mixing with her relief that nothing worse had happened. Her reaction only deepened my guilt. The weight of what might have happened if I hadn't been there, if my sister hadn't run back, settled heavily on my shoulders. I replayed the moment over and over, my regret a sharp reminder of how vulnerable we'd been. Now, years later, that day remains vivid in my memory, a haunting reminder of how quickly safety can be shattered. The image of that man, his intense gaze, and the way he stopped in his tracks is something I can't seem to forget. I still wonder about his intentions, the chill of his presence lingering as an unanswered question in the back of my mind. Despite my guilt, I'm grateful every day that my sister is safe. The hotel was unremarkable, but it was convenient, tucked close to the conference center I'd be working at for the next few days. It had the usual slightly faded charm, worn carpets, faint scents of stale perfume in the hallways, the hum of poorly maintained air conditioning. My room was modest but clean enough, with a view of the street below that gave me a vague sense of comfort in this unfamiliar city. I dropped my bag, planning to settle in for the evening, hoping for a quiet night before the busy day ahead. But something felt off. It was subtle at first, small things that wouldn't mean much alone. The smell was the first thing. I noticed it as soon as I entered the bathroom, a faint but distinct odor lingering that wasn't mine. It wasn't unpleasant exactly, just unexpected, like stale cigarettes mixed with a faint mustiness that didn't belong to any cleaning product. I checked the ventilation, which seemed to be working, and brushed it off as nothing more than the quirks of an older hotel. As I got ready for bed, a draft brushed past me in the bathroom, cold enough to make me shiver. I searched for an open window, but found nothing out of place. I tried to ignore the sensation and pushed it out of my mind. I'd probably just been traveling too long, feeling jumpy over things that were perfectly ordinary. I brushed my teeth, settled in, and fell into a restless sleep with a lingering discomfort that followed me through the night. The following day went as planned, a routine day of meetings and presentations. By evening, I was mentally exhausted, looking forward to a quiet night in my room. I returned a bit earlier than expected, hoping to unwind and get some work done in peace. But as I opened the door, I froze. There, in the dim light of my room, a woman stood hunched over my suitcase, her hands rifling through my clothes and personal items. My brain scrambled to process the scene, an intruder, right here in my supposedly private space. I took a step back, unable to do much more than stare, half believing that she might be some confused housekeeper. Her head shot up, her eyes meeting mine with a flash of something, fear or surprise, I couldn't tell. She mumbled something under her breath, something about how the key still worked. Her words felt distant, nonsensical. Before I could react, she dropped my belongings, her movements jerky, almost frantic, as she hurried past me out the door. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the mess she'd left, the echo of her presence still lingering in the air. I stood in silence for what felt like ages, my eyes fixed on the door, half expecting the woman to return. Slowly, I snapped back to reality, realizing that I needed to do something. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed the front desk. Within minutes, the police arrived, and I led them through the details as best I could, though my mind felt foggy, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. The officers took a quick look around, checking for any signs of forced entry. They asked if anything was missing, but nothing seemed out of place other than the disarray left by the intruder. As they moved through the room, one of them paused by the bathroom, noticing faint smears of white dust around the sink. He touched it, examining it with a puzzled look. "Drywall dust," he muttered, glancing at the walls, but everything looked intact. After a brief search, they found nothing more, and with no clear explanation, they advised me to keep my door locked and call if anything else happened. I thanked them, but a strange unease lingered, a feeling that their departure had left me more vulnerable than safe. When they left, I was left alone in the silence, the reality settling in. Someone had violated the thin boundary between my private world and the outside, in a place where I was supposed to feel secure. Despite my fear, curiosity got the best of me, compelling me to inspect the bathroom where the officer had noticed the dust. The faint smell of stale cigarettes lingered, stronger now, though I hadn't noticed it before. I approached the mirror, my fingers trailing along its edges. As I pressed along one edge, the mirror shifted slightly. My heart thudded as I realized it wasn't secured to the wall as I'd assumed. Carefully, I slid it aside, revealing a dark, narrow crawlspace behind it. The stale air hit me first, thick and heavy, carrying the unmistakable signs of recent habitation. Inside, there was a thin mattress, crumpled sheets, and a scattering of personal belongings. A pack of cigarettes, a water bottle, and a half-eaten bag of chips. The scene felt surreal, a hidden life carved out just behind my bathroom wall, unseen and unknown until now. My skin prickled with the dawning realization that someone had been living in the darkness, slipping through hidden passageways that I'd never known existed. This stranger had been just beyond the mirror, silently sharing the space, moving through the shadows where I'd never thought to look. Without waiting, I called the police again, urging them to return and see what I had discovered. When they arrived and saw the crawl space, their expressions mirrored my horror and disbelief. They pulled on gloves, entering the cramped area and finding a narrow tunnel that extended beyond my room, leading to other hidden spaces throughout the building. They informed me that the walls had been patched poorly, allowing this stranger to slip from one room to another undetected. I couldn't shake the thought that, even as I'd gone about my routine, this stranger had been inches away, possibly watching, sharing the space I thought was mine alone. The officers looked equally disturbed as they completed their investigation, though there was little left to say. I packed my belongings in silence, the weight of the unseen presence pressing down with each item I placed in my bag. There were no final words exchanged, no attempts to make sense of what had happened. I left the hotel quietly, my coworkers and I retreating to a safer, more ordinary place.